My parents made me pretend I was pregnant to hide my sister's secret. The weirdest thing about being forced to pretend you're pregnant is not the fake belly. It's the way people start smiling at you. Strangers open doors for you. Women you've never met touch your arm and say things like, "You must be so excited." Cashiers tell you to take care of yourself. Neighbors suddenly care about how you're feeling every morning. Everyone becomes kind. Everyone becomes warm. And every single time it happened, I wanted to scream. Because the baby everyone thought was mine actually belonged to my 14-year-old sister. And the only reason the lie existed was because my parents cared more about their reputation than her safety. I didn't agree to it at first. I want to make that clear. People always assume that when you're part of a lie that big, you must have gone along with it easily, like you were in on the scheme from the start. But the truth is that the day my parents told me what they expected from me was the day I realized that family loyalty can turn into something ugly when fear gets involved. The whole nightmare started on a Wednesday afternoon in early spring. I remember the day too clearly, which is something trauma does to you. It preserves the smallest details like they're important. Evidence in a trial you never get to attend. I had just gotten home from school. I was 17 at the time, finishing my junior year, already thinking about college applications and scholarships. Because my parents had made it very clear that if I wanted to leave this town one day, I would have to earn my way out. My little sister Emma was already home. That alone should have been my first clue that something was wrong. Because Emma normally stayed late for art club. She loved that stupid club more than anything. She would come home with paint on, her fingers in stories about the ridiculous sculptures people tried to build out of clay. But that day, she was sitting on the couch staring at the TV without actually watching it. The screen was on, but her eyes were somewhere else entirely. I remember dropping my backpack by the door and asking her if she was sick because she looked pale in a way that made my stomach twist. She didn't answer. She just shook her head once. Our mom was in the kitchen, which also felt strange because she usually worked late shifts at the clinic. I could hear cabinet doors opening and closing, like she was looking for something, but couldn't remember what. Dad was home too. That part should have terrified me, immediately because my dad almost never came home before 6 unless something had gone wrong. The entire house felt tense. Not loud tense. Quiet tense. The kind of quiet where everyone is waiting for something bad to finally be said out loud. I walked into the kitchen and asked my mom what was going on, and she turned around holding a glass of water like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her face looked exhausted. Not the normal tired she had after work. Something deeper. She told me to sit down. When parents say that sentence, you always know you're about to hear something you wish you hadn't. I sat at the table while Dad folded his arms and leaned against the counter. Emma was still in the living room, but she had moved closer, to the doorway, like she wanted to hear without being part of the conversation. Mom took a long breath and said Emma had something she needed to tell me. I remember looking over at my sister and thinking, she looked like a little kid who had broken something expensive. Emma walked into the kitchen slowly. She kept her head down the whole time. When she finally spoke, her voice was so quiet I almost didn't hear it. I'm pregnant. For a second, my brain refused to process the words. Not because I didn't understand them, because they didn't make sense attached to her. Emma was 14. 14-year-olds are supposed to worry about homework and annoying teachers and whether their friends are mad at them over stupid group chats. They are not supposed to stand in kitchens confessing that they are pregnant. So I laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes out automatically, when something feels impossible. Nobody else laughed. Emma started crying. My dad's face hardened. My mom looked like she had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. That was the moment I realized it wasn't a joke. I remember the next 10 minutes like a storm of questions crashing into each other. How far along are you? Who is the father? Does anyone else know? Did you see a doctor? What happened? Emma could barely answer through the tears. She said she thought she was about 3 months along. 3 months. That meant she had been carrying that secret alone the entire winter. When I asked if she had seen a doctor, my parents exchanged a look that immediately made my chest tighten. No, my mom said. She hadn't, not yet. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A 14-year-old girl had been pregnant for 3 months without medical care. And my parents were acting like the biggest problem was how the neighbors might react. I told them she needed to see a doctor immediately. My mom said they were figuring it out. My dad said we needed to think carefully before involving anyone else. That sentence made something cold settle in my stomach. Because I suddenly understood what they were really worried about. Not Emma. The gossip. The church. The people in town who loved whispering about other families. Our parents were terrified of becoming a story. What I didn't realize yet was how far they were willing to go to prevent that. The idea came from my mother 3 days later. I wish I could say it happened during a screaming argument, or some dramatic moment where everyone lost control, but it didn't. It happened quietly. Too quietly. She called me into the bedroom she shared with Dad while Emma stayed downstairs watching TV. There was a cardboard box sitting on the bed. Mom opened it like she was showing me something fragile. Inside was a silicone pregnancy belly. At first I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then she said the sentence that still makes my skin crawl when I remember it. You're going to wear this. I thought she meant for a joke. Or maybe some kind of weird prank. But my mother was completely serious. She explained that if people found out Emma was pregnant at 14, it would destroy her future. Teachers would treat her differently. Parents wouldn't want their kids around her. The church would gossip. The town would talk. But if everyone believed the baby was mine, the situation would be easier to manage. I was 17, still young enough that people would shake their heads but eventually move on. I remember staring at the fake belly on the bed and feeling like the room had tilted sideways. You want me to pretend I'm pregnant? My dad spoke for the first time. It's the only way to protect your sister. Protect. That word made me angry. Emma didn't need protection from gossip. She needed a doctor. She needed help. She needed adults who cared more about her health than their reputation. I said exactly that. And that's when my dad's expression changed from worried to cold. He said something I will never forget. The only thing dying here is your selfishness. Put on the belly. That sentence was the moment I realized arguing wasn't going to change anything. My parents had already decided, and in their minds, my role in this disaster had already been assigned. I wish I could say I walked out. I wish I could say I refused. But the truth is more complicated. Because when I looked past them toward the hallway, I saw Emma standing there listening. Her eyes were red from crying. She looked terrified. Not manipulative. Not guilty. Just a scared 14-year-old kid who had gotten herself into something bigger than she understood. And that was the moment I realized that if I didn't help her, nobody would. So I picked up the fake belly. And everything in my life started unraveling after that. The first time I wore the fake belly outside the house was the moment the lie stopped being an idea and became something real. Until that point, everything still felt temporary. Like maybe my parents would come to their senses, or Emma would suddenly decide she wanted to tell the truth, or some adult somewhere would step in and force the situation into the open. But once my mother helped me strap that silicone stomach under my shirt and step outside the front door, the whole thing shifted into something heavier and harder to escape from. Lies have a strange gravity once other people start believing them. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of quiet weekend morning where the neighborhood feels slow and peaceful. Birds were making noise in the trees. Someone down the street was mowing their lawn, and the air smelled like fresh grass and coffee. Under normal circumstances, it would have been a nice day. Instead, I stood in our hallway staring at my reflection in the mirror, while my mother adjusted the fake belly under my sweater. It looked disturbingly real. That was the worst part. The shape pressed against the fabric in a way that made it obvious without being cartoonish. I suddenly understood why people spent money on those things for theater or movies. From the outside, it looked exactly like the early curve of a pregnancy. My stomach twisted. My mom stepped back to examine her work and nodded, like she had just finished fixing a crooked picture frame. There, she said calmly. That looks natural. Natural. The word made my chest tighten. Emma was standing near the stairs watching the whole thing happen. She hadn't said much since the plan had been explained. Most of the time she stayed quiet, like she was afraid that speaking too much might somehow make everything worse. Her eyes kept drifting toward the fake belly. I couldn't tell if she felt guilty or relieved. Maybe both. Dad was already outside waiting in the car. Because the first stop of this nightmare performance was the grocery store. Apparently my parents believed the easiest way to control the story was to introduce it to the community before rumors could start forming around Emma. In other words, they were about to stage my fake pregnancy announcement in aisle 3 next to the cereal. The drive there felt endless. My mom kept talking in the passenger seat about how people might react and what I should say if anyone asked questions. She had already decided on the timeline. According to her plan, I was about 4 months pregnant, which explained why I was just starting to show. 4 months. Emma was actually closer to 5. The numbers made my head spin. Dad drove silently, gripping the steering wheel like he was navigating through a storm instead of a 15-minute drive across town. Emma sat next to me in the back seat, her hands folded in her lap. She kept staring out the window, like she wanted to disappear into the passing scenery. I wanted to grab her hand and say something comforting, but I didn't even know what comfort would look like in a situation like this. When we pulled into the grocery store parking lot, my legs suddenly felt weak. I had lied before in my life. Everyone has. Small lies, harmless lies. The kind you tell to avoid hurting someone's feelings or getting into trouble over something minor. This was different. This was a lie that would grow every day. A lie that would eventually involve a real baby. The automatic doors slid open as we walked inside, and the cool air of the store hit my face like a warning. I tried to keep my posture natural the way my mom had instructed, but I felt like everyone could see through me immediately. Every step made me hyper-aware of the fake weight attached to my stomach. The first few minutes passed quietly, while we grabbed a cart and moved toward the produce section. Then it happened. Mrs. Peterson spotted us. If you've ever lived in a small town, you probably know someone like Mrs. Peterson. She had lived in the neighborhood longer than anyone else, and she treated local gossip like a community service. Her eyes landed on my stomach almost instantly. Her face changed in the most dramatic way possible. "Oh my goodness," she said loudly, grabbing my arm. "Are you expecting?" For a second, my brain froze. This was the moment the lie officially left our family and entered the outside world. My mom answered before I could. "Yes," she said with a warm smile that looked disturbingly natural. "We just found out a little while ago." Mrs. Peterson gasped like someone had just told her the most exciting news imaginable. She immediately started talking about how fast kids grow up and how she had watched me ride my bike down the street when I was little. The whole time she spoke, her hand rested lightly on my arm. I felt sick. Congratulations poured out of her mouth one after another, and before I even realized what was happening, she pulled me into a hug. That hug felt like a weight crushing my chest, because she believed me. She believed the lie completely. And the worst part was that she looked genuinely happy for me. By the time we reached the checkout line, 2 more people had congratulated me. The cashier asked if I knew whether it was a boy or girl yet. A woman behind us in line told me pregnancy cravings would start soon and laughed about how she once cried because her husband brought home the wrong brand of pickles. Every conversation felt like walking deeper into quicksand. Emma stayed close to the cart the whole time, quiet and pale. At one point, I caught her staring at the floor while someone congratulated me again, and the expression on her face looked like guilt mixed with fear. When we finally got back to the car, I sat in the back seat and stared at my hands. My dad started the engine. My mom sighed like she had just finished a successful performance. "That went well," she said. I turned toward her slowly. "Emma still needs a doctor." The car fell silent again. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom looked out the window like she hadn't heard me. "She's 14, I continued, my voice shaking. "You can't just hide her in the house and hope everything works out. She needs medical care." Mom finally turned around. Her expression had changed from calm to irritated. "We are handling it." "No, you're not." Emma shifted uncomfortably beside me. Dad spoke without looking back. "Drop it." "I'm not dropping it," I said. "What if something goes wrong?" My mom's voice suddenly became cold. "Nothing is going to go wrong. You don't know that." The tension in the car grew so thick it felt hard to breathe. Dad pulled into our driveway and shut off the engine. Then he turned around and looked directly at me. "You made your point," he said. "Now you're going to stop pushing this." I stared at him in disbelief. "You're more worried about people talking than her health." "That's not true." "It feels true." For a moment I thought he might yell. Instead he spoke quietly. And somehow that made the words worse. "If this story falls apart, your sister's life will be destroyed before it even begins." I looked over at Emma. She still hadn't said anything. She just sat there with tears running silently down her cheeks. That night was the first time our house filled with the kind of arguments that only happen when everyone is exhausted. And nobody wants to admit they're wrong. My parents stayed up late in the kitchen whispering harshly to each other. Emma locked herself in her bedroom. I lay awake staring at the ceiling wondering how we had reached a point where protecting appearances mattered more than protecting a 14-year-old girl. The fake belly hung over the back of my chair like a silent accusation. And deep down, I had a terrible feeling that the lie we had started was going to become something far worse than any of us were prepared for. Because the truth about Emma's pregnancy was only the beginning. And the person responsible for it had not been mentioned even once. The first day I had to go to school wearing the fake belly was the moment I realized just how heavy lies could be, not physically, but emotionally. My stomach didn't actually weigh anything, but every step I took felt like I was carrying 100 pairs of eyes watching me, judging me, questioning me, expecting me to behave a certain way. The fake belly was snug under my shirt, pressing against me constantly, reminding me of the role I'd been forced to play. By the time I got dressed, I had already started to hate myself. Not because of Emma, not because of my parents, not even because of the belly itself. I hated myself because I couldn't think of a single way to make any of this stop without someone getting hurt. When I walked into school, everything changed. People whispered immediately. Not rude whispers, but that kind of soft, excited gossip that spreads faster than fire in dry grass. Kids I barely knew were smiling at me in the hallways, patting my shoulder, asking if I was okay, asking if I had started feeling any kicks yet. Every single interaction felt like another weight pressing down on my chest. I nodded, I smiled. I whispered thank yous, all the while knowing that Emma, the girl who was really carrying a baby, was hiding at home, probably terrified and confused, and that I was the one taking all the heat of attention. By the end of the first hour, rumors had already started to grow. One of my so-called friends approached me in the cafeteria. "I heard congratulations are in order," she said. "Are you telling people yet or keeping it a secret?" She smiled, but there was an edge to her voice that made it clear this wasn't casual chatter. It was judgment wrapped in curiosity. I didn't know what to say. "Thanks," I mumbled, hoping she would leave it at that. She didn't. She leaned closer. "You have to tell us. Is it a boy or a girl? How far along are you?" I shook my head quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't know yet," I said. Her eyes narrowed slightly, like she didn't believe me. But she backed off, at least for that moment. It was just the beginning. By lunch, every table had someone talking about me. About the situation, about the baby that wasn't actually mine. I couldn't eat. Every bite felt heavy in my mouth, like chewing on guilt and shame. I kept glancing around for Emma, but she wasn't there. I kept thinking about the moment I would go home and see her face, how scared she would be, how alone she would feel, how guilty she probably already felt for a mistake she had no control over. And then came the first time I overheard someone say the name of the boy involved. It wasn't supposed to happen. My parents had told us to keep the father's identity a secret at all costs. But in a small town, secrets are fragile. One careless comment, one rumor, and suddenly everyone knows. I was sitting in the library when I heard two girls whispering across the room. "I heard it's, Jeremy from sophomore history class," one said. Can you imagine? 14 and already pregnant? My stomach dropped. I didn't even have to ask. They were talking about Emma, and suddenly the lie I was living collided with the reality I couldn't escape. I felt dizzy, like the walls were closing in. I couldn't focus on my homework, couldn't focus on breathing, couldn't focus on anything except the fact that my little sister's secret, the one thing we were supposed to protect, was slipping through our fingers. When I got home that afternoon, Emma was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands over her face, crying. My mom was in the living room, pretending to read a magazine, and Dad was silent, leaning against the counter. I didn't even bother to greet them. I went straight to Emma and pulled her into a hug. She pressed her face into my shoulder, shaking, and whispered, "It's everywhere. Everyone knows." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell my parents off. I wanted to tell the teachers off. I wanted to scream at the world for being cruel and small and judgmental. But I couldn't, not yet. Not without putting Emma in even more danger. My mom's voice finally cut through the room, calm but sharp. "You need to keep wearing that belly. Do you understand?" I nodded, tight-lipped. My parents had a way of framing everything as if it were my choice. But the truth was clear. Refusal meant consequences I couldn't even imagine. Over the next few weeks, the lie became a performance I had to perfect. I learned to cradle the belly absent-mindedly so people would think it was real. I learned how to excuse myself from classes without raising suspicion. I learned to avoid questions I couldn't answer. Every interaction, every smile, every nod was exhausting. And the more I performed, the more the lines between truth and lie blurred. Emma stopped talking much. She spent hours drawing or staring out the window. Sometimes she would hide in her room and sob quietly so my parents wouldn't hear. At night, I could hear her pacing, whispering to herself, trying to make sense of what had happened. She hadn't asked me for help much, but I could see the pleading in her eyes whenever I came near. The first fight happened about a week later. My mom had been trying to coach me on how to act pregnant for a school assembly, and I finally snapped. "This is insane," I yelled, my voice shaking. "Emma needs help. She could be sick, she could be hurting herself, she could be—" "She's fine," my mom interrupted, her face tight with anger. "And if you want to ruin everything, go ahead. But remember, the only thing dying here is your selfishness." I froze. That sentence had been used before, but this time it felt like a physical punch. I wanted to hit something, scream something, anything to release the tension, but all I could do was look at Emma, who was sitting silently on the stairs, face pale, eyes wide, and trembles running through her hands. From that moment on, the house became a battlefield. Words became weapons. Silence became a threat. Every day was a negotiation between what I wanted to do and what I could do without putting Emma or myself in even worse danger. And just when I thought I had a handle on the situation, the first school assembly came. I had to walk across the stage in front of hundreds of students, smiling, pretending to be excited, while Emma's life hung in the balance in ways I couldn't even begin to explain. It was terrifying. The moment I stepped onto the stage, all eyes were on me. I could hear whispers, see nods, hear a few claps. I smiled because that's what I was supposed to do. I pressed my hands gently over the belly and walked to the microphone. Hi, I said, my voice tight. I just wanted to, I'm excited to, let everyone know. I couldn't finish. The tears came too fast. I backed away from the microphone and rushed off stage before anyone could see. The applause faded behind me, leaving nothing but my pounding heart and the sick, horrible weight of the lie pressing against my chest. Emma was waiting outside the auditorium, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. She looked up at me with eyes full of fear, guilt, and shame. I felt my stomach twist again. This was only the beginning. The lie was growing faster than any of us could control. And the first ripple of real consequences had already started spreading. The day the rumors started reaching teachers was the day I realized the lie had begun to take on a life of its own. Until then, it had been whispers in the hallways, sideways glances in the cafeteria, and awkward congratulations from classmates. But the first teacher who approached me in the middle of class changed everything. It was Ms. Reynolds, my English teacher. She had always been the type to notice small details, the kind of teacher who could tell when a student was hiding something, even if they tried their hardest to mask it. That day, she stood by my desk with her hands folded, her face carefully neutral. Are you okay? She asked softly. I froze. Every eye in the classroom felt like it was piercing through me. But the worst part was that she believed me without hesitation. The fake belly I wore had done its job perfectly, and in that moment, I realized that the lie had already spread beyond anyone's control. I'm fine, I said quickly, my voice higher than usual. She didn't look convinced, but she moved on, leaving me with that horrible sense of exposure that comes from pretending a truth that isn't yours. By the next week, my fake pregnancy had become the dominant topic of conversation in school. Cafeteria tables whispered, teachers exchanged subtle looks, and even students who had never spoken to me before now nodded, politely in the hallways as if acknowledging a shared secret. People started offering advice, telling me what to eat, what to avoid, how to prepare. Each comment cut deeper than the last because they weren't directed at the real person. The person who needed care, but at me, the unwilling actor. At home, things weren't getting easier. In fact, the pressure only escalated. My parents now monitored every word Emma and I spoke, and every interaction we had outside the house. They forced Emma to hide in plain sight, to behave normally, to attend school like nothing was happening, while I walked the halls pretending to carry her child. It was exhausting, mentally and physically. Every day I woke up with a pit in my stomach, wondering what new disaster awaited. And as if the stress of the lie weren't enough, the truth about the father was starting to surface in the most dangerous ways. It started with a whisper I caught in the grocery store. A neighbor, someone I thought barely knew us, had leaned over to another woman and said, I heard it's Jeremy. Poor girl. Jeremy, the same boy whose name I had overheard in the library. The thought made my stomach twist violently. He was 2 years older than Emma, practically an adult in her eyes. And suddenly the lie wasn't just mine to carry. It was entwined with someone else's reputation, someone else's choices, and someone else's ignorance. When I confronted my parents about it that evening, asking what we were going to do if people started putting two and two together, my mother's eyes flashed with irritation. Don't worry about it, she snapped. Jeremy's parents are decent people. They'll keep quiet. This isn't your problem. It is my problem, I said, my voice trembling. It's her problem. This is Emma. She's 14. She shouldn't be facing gossip, fear, and the only thing dying here is your selfishness. My father interrupted again, voice low but venomous. Do you understand? You were chosen for this role. You do your job or you'll regret it. I clenched my fists until my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream, to hit something, to tear apart the walls of the house and let the truth fly free. But I knew that if I did, Emma would be the one paying the price. She had no choice, but I did. And my choice was to stay quiet. Days bled into weeks. The fake belly became a constant weight on my body, my back aching from the silicone pressing against me. I had to learn how to act pregnant. To fake the fatigue, to fake the occasional cramps, to smile through every stranger's congratulations. I had to endure the constant, suffocating gaze of the community, all the while knowing the person who actually needed care was hidden, safely behind closed doors, invisible to everyone. Emma stopped speaking to me much, her fear and shame keeping her quiet. She drew obsessively in her sketchbooks, filling pages with lines and faces, and shadows that made me ache because I knew they represented everything she couldn't say. Sometimes I would find notes she had scribbled, little thoughts and worries about what would happen if anyone found out. If Jeremy's family did something, if the town discovered her secret. I never read them out loud. I just kept them tucked away, feeling like a co-conspirator in a tragedy. That wasn't mine, but somehow had become my responsibility. Then came the day when the first real threat arrived. A teacher pulled me aside, asking about inconsistencies in my story. When I said I didn't know what she meant, she looked skeptical. I want to make sure you're getting support, she said. There are health programs, counselors, doctors. Every word felt like a dagger. I wanted to scream, she doesn't need me to be the pregnant one, she needs help. But I couldn't. I could only nod, smile weakly, and hope my expression didn't betray the fear boiling inside me. At night, when the house was quiet, I could hear my parents whispering in the kitchen. Every conversation sounded like plotting, strategizing how to keep the town and the school in the dark. They spoke about Emma's future like she was a chess piece, like her health and her trauma didn't matter at all. The more I listened, the angrier I became, but the more I understood that anger couldn't fix anything, not yet. And then came the first time I almost lost control. It was after school, and Emma had been unusually quiet, almost ghost-like as we walked home together. I could see her panic building in the little fidget of her hands, the way her shoulders hunched forward, the way her eyes darted nervously at the passing neighbors. "I can't do this," she whispered finally, her voice cracking. "I can't pretend I'm fine. I can't keep it inside anymore." I wanted to take her in my arms and promise everything would be okay. But I couldn't, because telling the truth, even in that moment of desperation, would blow everything wide open. "Shh," I said softly, putting a hand over hers. I know it's hard. I'll help you. I'll always help you. But we have to be smart. We have to be careful. Please, just a little longer." Her face twisted with fear and gratitude, and she nodded, pressing closer to me as if I could shield her from the storm. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about how long this lie would last, how much worse it could get, and what kind of person I was becoming by living someone else's truth. I was 17. I had dreams, plans, the vaguest glimmer of freedom in the world. And yet, here I was, trapped in a nightmare of my own family's making, carrying a child that wasn't mine, hiding the truth of a little girl's first mistake from the entire world. The lie was no longer just a lie. It had grown teeth. It was alive and it was hungry. And every day I feared it would devour everything I loved, starting with Emma. By the time the first month of my pregnancy had passed, the lie had grown teeth sharp, enough to slice through the careful control my parents thought they had. Suddenly, everyone in our lives, teachers, neighbors, church members, even distant relatives, became invested in my fake pregnancy. They wanted details, advice, opinions, and reassurance that the baby was developing normally. Every smile I had to give, every nod, every feigned wobble of the belly was another layer of the performance, another brick in the wall of lies I had been forced to build. And every day I felt myself cracking under the weight. It started small. People commenting on my hair, on the way I walked, asking if I was tired. Then it escalated. One morning, our neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, knocked on the door holding a casserole dish. "I thought you might like something easy for dinner," she said warmly. "You need to take care of yourself, you know." She smiled at me, genuinely kind, and I wanted nothing more than to tell her the truth. But I couldn't. I just nodded and forced a smile, taking the dish with hands that shook so badly I could barely hold it. Emma was no better off. She stayed hidden in her room most of the day, peeking out only when she needed something, avoiding contact with anyone in the house, afraid of making a sound that might betray her secret. Some nights I could hear her crying quietly in the darkness, and I'd lie awake listening, trying to convince myself that as long as she was safe, I could endure this nightmare. But one night, the tension in the house finally reached a breaking point. My parents had been whispering in the kitchen for hours, plotting how to deal with a church committee that had started asking questions about the baby. I could hear the sharp edge in their voices, the clipped syllables, the low, controlled anger. Every once in a while, a word would cut through the walls. Ruin, future, scandal? Emma started pacing her room, and I could hear the soft shuffle of her slippers against the floor. I got up to check on her. "Emma, it's okay," I whispered, gently pushing the door open. She froze, her eyes wide with terror. "I know this is scary, but we're going to get through it," I said, trying to make my voice calm, steady. She shook her head. I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm drowning. I didn't ask for this. I didn't know how it would get so bad." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I wanted to scream, to rip my fake belly off, to tell the whole world the truth and finally breathe. But I couldn't, not yet. Not without putting her in more danger than she could handle. The next day at school was worse. Someone had started a rumor that the father might be someone older, someone who had taken advantage of Emma. I didn't need to ask who. It was Jeremy. I knew his name. I'd heard it whispered in libraries, in grocery stores, even by people who didn't know they were speaking loudly enough for me to overhear. And suddenly, the lie wasn't just my burden, it was a ticking time bomb, waiting to explode over multiple families. By the second month, my parents began controlling every aspect of our lives in ways I hadn't fully realized before. Emma had to attend school only in certain classes, avoiding teachers who might suspect the truth. I had to perform more convincingly, practicing walking with the belly, pretending to be nauseous, practicing fake contractions that my mom said might come during labor. Every time I looked at her, I felt a wave of guilt so strong it made my stomach hurt. Then came the first confrontation with a family member, outside our immediate household. My Aunt Lisa had come over excited and bubbly, congratulating me. She touched my belly lightly, asked how I was feeling, asked about names. I froze, panic surging through me. One slip, one moment of hesitation, and she would know. My parents had trained me well, but Aunt Lisa had always been perceptive. I smiled, gave a soft laugh, nodded politely, and hoped she wouldn't notice the shaking in my hands. She did notice, of course. Later that evening, when my parents thought we were all asleep, she pulled my mom aside, whispering sharply, "Are you sure she's okay? She looks fragile, and is she really ready for this?" The next day, my mom's entire demeanor changed. She was quieter, more calculating, and her smile no longer reached her eyes. "No one can know anything outside the house," she said, voice tight. "If this story gets out, everything we've built falls apart. Emma's life, yours, our reputation, all of it. You will keep the act. You understand?" I nodded, but inside a storm was building. The lies had created a cage, and each day the bars got tighter. People's eyes, their questions, their concern, they were like chains. And at night, the house was a battlefield where no one slept. Everyone whispered. And Emma and I were trapped in silence that screamed louder than words. One night, I finally snapped. My parents were arguing about how to deal with a nosy neighbor, and I could feel my own patience shattering. I shouted, my voice cracking with desperation. "This isn't about anyone's reputation. This is about Emma. She's 14. She's terrified. And the baby, your solution, is killing her. Or at least it's killing what's left of her childhood." My mom's face went pale and my dad's jaw tightened. "Enough," my dad said, voice low and dangerous. "You think you know better than we do? The only thing dying here is your selfishness. Put on the belly and act, or you'll wish you had." Emma was crying in the hallway. I wanted to run to her, to hold her, to tell her it wasn't her fault. But I didn't. I just stared at her. feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. At that moment, I realized the lie wasn't just affecting us. It was shaping who we were becoming. I was no longer just a sister helping another sister. I was a participant in a manipulation so deep, so calculated that I couldn't tell where protection ended and cruelty began. And deep down, I knew this nightmare was far from over. By the time the 3rd month of my fake pregnancy rolled around, the situation had metastasized into something I barely recognized as my life. The small lies had become an all-consuming force that infiltrated every corner of our home. Every hallway at school, every smile from a neighbor, every whispered comment behind my back. My parents were no longer simply orchestrating a deception. They were enforcing a prison sentence, one we all had to live under. The most terrifying part was the way they controlled Emma. She was still 14, still a child in every sense that mattered, but they treated her like a fragile object that could shatter if exposed to a single glance from the outside world. She had to hide in plain sight, moving carefully, speaking minimally, never letting a slip of emotion show. And every day she became more silent, retreating into herself until I could barely recognize the sister I had once shared secrets with. I began to understand the true extent of their manipulation when a small confrontation escalated into something much darker. My father had caught me sitting with Emma on the stairs one evening, whispering about the rumors circulating in school. "Do you understand what I told you?" He barked. "You are the act now. She is under my protection and you exist to reinforce the lie. Do not deviate." His voice was low, precise, like the edge of a knife pressed against my skin. "Yes, Dad," I whispered, my throat tight. "I understand." He looked me over, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Good, because the moment you falter, everything collapses. Do you want Emma's life ruined? Do you want this family's name dragged through the mud?" I nodded again, but inside something was breaking. Then came the neighbors, who had started to notice inconsistencies in the story. A casual question about how far along would cause me to invent timelines on the fly, dodging details, fabricating appointments that never existed, inventing fake doctor visits. Every lie became a knot tightening around my chest. One afternoon, as I walked home from school, Mrs. Callahan, our nosy neighbor, intercepted me near the mailbox. "Darling, how are you feeling today?" she asked, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder. Her eyes were sharp, scrutinizing. "You don't seem, well," I forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a little tired." "You don't want to see a doctor?" "You're young and you deserve proper care," she said, frowning. I felt panic spike in my chest. If I told her the truth, Emma could be exposed. If I lied, she would grow suspicious. I nodded quickly, mumbling something about being scheduled for an appointment next week, and fled toward the house. Inside, I collapsed onto my bed, the fake belly still strapped tightly under my sweater. My chest heaved, my hands shook, and the tears came without warning. Emma knocked softly on my door. "Are you okay?" she whispered, voice barely audible. "I'm fine," I said, my voice cracking. "Just tired." She sat beside me, silent. I knew what she was thinking. She felt trapped, guilty, scared. And I felt trapped too, but in a different way. I was the one everyone saw. I was the one everyone believed. And yet the truth I carried, the truth about her, about the father, about our parents' obsession with reputation, was mine alone. The tension inside the house escalated further. When my father began to question the timing of the pregnancy in front of Emma and me, testing our ability to maintain consistency, he would ask questions at odd hours, demanding explanations for my supposed cravings, my fatigue, even how I slept at night. My mother, meanwhile, orchestrated the schedules, feeding us little lies and rehearsed answers to keep the act convincing. One night, Emma snapped. She had been quietly drawing in her sketchbook for hours, tears streaking her face when she hurled it across the room. "I can't do this. I can't. I'm too young. I didn't." My mother appeared instantly, furious. "Emma, how dare you speak like that? This is about survival. You are under my protection. You will not embarrass this family." My father's glare followed me. "And you will continue to uphold your role. Every word you speak, every motion you make, it is part of this plan. Do you understand?" "Yes," I whispered, trembling. "No," he snapped. "Do you really understand? One slip and everything we've done, everything we've protected, falls apart." I felt sick. The lines between right and wrong blurred entirely. My parents had weaponized their fear of shame and reputation into something that controlled us completely. Emma and I were no longer children in the eyes of our parents. We were tools, instruments, actors, pieces in a cruel performance that we had no way of escaping. Weeks passed, and the lie continued to grow. At school, rumors about the father of my fake pregnancy intensified. Some students suggested scandalous things. Others whispered about punishment. And a few even hinted at connections I had never heard. Each time I heard a snippet, my chest tightened with panic. I had to think fast, fabricate explanations, and hope no one pressed further. And yet, despite all of this, Emma continued to retreat into herself. She barely spoke, she barely smiled. And she stopped attending any after-school activities. Every day I worried that one more second of silence, one more night spent crying in her room alone, would be the moment the entire situation spiraled completely out of control. The turning point came when my mother decided it was time to involve the church. She arranged a private meeting with the pastor, planning to frame my fake pregnancy as a moral test, a story of youthful responsibility. I sat across from the pastor, the fake belly strapped beneath my sweater, feeling every inch of the lie suffocating me. Emma had been hidden behind the living room curtains, a silent witness to our performance. The pastor smiled warmly at me. "We want to support you," he said. "We know this is a difficult time." I nodded, my throat tight, unable to speak. My mother leaned forward, her smile sharp, almost predatory. "Yes," she said smoothly. "We're doing everything we can to ensure the best for her and the baby." Emma's eyes widened. I saw the panic and confusion there. She looked like she wanted to scream, to run, to tell the world the truth. But she didn't, because at 14 she had no choice. And I realized in that moment that the lie had fully taken over our lives. There was no turning back. The act had become reality in the eyes of everyone outside our house. And inside we were all prisoners, trapped by fear, guilt, shame, and the inescapable pressure of reputation. By the 4th month, The act of pretending to be pregnant had consumed every part of my life. I was no longer just a student, a sister, or a daughter. I had become a performance, an embodiment of a lie, so large it threatened to crush everything I once believed about my family, about myself, about the world. Every day, I moved through the hallways of school with the fake belly strapped under my clothes, a constant, unrelenting reminder of the truth I couldn't speak aloud. Every nod, every smile, every whisper of congratulations felt like a chain tightening around my chest. Emma had changed almost beyond recognition. Her laughter, which had once filled our small house, was gone. She drew constantly in sketchbooks, little faces and shadows filling the pages, silent testimony to her fear and guilt. At night, I could hear her pacing, whispering, crying quietly so my parents wouldn't hear. She no longer spoke to me except in the smallest murmurs, but I could see her desperation in every trembling hand, every flinch when someone approached. I started staying up late, watching her from the doorway, trying to figure out a way to protect her without exposing the lie. Sometimes I would bring her small things from my room, extra notebooks, pens, snacks, little gestures that seemed meaningless to anyone else but were lifelines to her. She'd accept them silently, glancing up at me with wide, fearful eyes, and I'd feel that terrible mix of guilt and love crash over me. I was helping her, yes, but I was also a part of the nightmare she was trapped in. At school, the scrutiny was unbearable. The cafeteria was a minefield of questions and rumors. Teachers began asking questions about prenatal care, offering programs and appointments I couldn't attend, knowing all the while that my parents would never allow me or Emma to see a doctor. Students whispered about the father, about the circumstances, about what it meant for our family, and every hallway conversation was a potential disaster, every glance a threat. Then came the first real threat from outside the household. My aunt, who had always been sharp and suspicious, began asking pointed questions during family gatherings. "How are you feeling, really?" she'd ask. "Have you seen a doctor?" My parents deflected smoothly, but I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. I tried to smile and nod politely, but the act was wearing me down. I was running on pure adrenaline and fear, and every interaction made me feel smaller, weaker, more trapped. One night, the tension reached a breaking point. My parents were in the kitchen arguing quietly about how to deal with a neighbor, who had started spreading rumors, and I had been sitting with Emma in her room trying to calm her. She'd been crying softly, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't pretend I'm fine. I can't keep it inside." I felt the same panic rising in me. I wanted to scream, to rip the fake belly off, to tell the truth and finally breathe. But I couldn't, not without putting Emma in more danger. "Shh," I said softly, pressing a hand to hers. I know it's hard. I'll help you. I'll always help you. But we have to be smart. We have to be careful. Please, just a little longer." The next day, the community pressure intensified. Teachers were noticing inconsistencies. Neighbors were making comments that hinted at suspicion. And my parents were growing increasingly controlling, monitoring every step we took. I could feel my own sanity fraying at the edges. Every day was a tightrope walk over a chasm of fear and shame, and I was terrified of falling. Then came the moment that shattered what little control I had left. A classmate had somehow discovered Jeremy's name and started connecting dots, asking questions in front of other students, hinting at things my parents had tried to bury. Panic rose like a tidal wave inside me. If anyone outside the house connected the story, if the father's identity came to light, everything would collapse. At home, I confronted my parents. "You can't keep this hidden forever," I said, voice trembling. "Someone is going to find out." Emma is terrified. We're all terrified. "This is too big." My father's jaw tightened. "Then you will keep your mouth shut. The only thing dying here is your selfishness. You are the act. Do you understand?" I nodded, but inside I was crumbling. I was 17, forced to carry a secret that could ruin lives, trapped in a performance that demanded perfection at the expense of everyone I loved. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, listening to Emma pacing and whispering to herself. I realized the lie had become more dangerous than I ever imagined. It wasn't just about protecting reputation anymore, it was about survival, manipulation, and control. And deep down, I knew the storm wasn't over. The consequences of this lie were only just beginning, and there was no telling who it would hurt first. The 5th month of the fake pregnancy was the point, when the lie started unraveling, bit by bit in ways I couldn't control. The outside world was no longer just an audience. It had become a jury, a critic, a predator circling, waiting for the first misstep. Every whisper in the hallways, every sideways glance from a teacher, every smile laced with curiosity or judgment, felt like a knife pressing against my chest. I had become hyper-aware of every move, every word, every breath. The belly was no longer just a prop. It was a cage. At school, things were getting dangerous. Rumors about Jeremy, the father of the real pregnancy, had spread further than I anticipated. Kids who didn't know us were connecting dots, asking questions, giggling in corners. Even teachers started noticing discrepancies. One afternoon, Ms. Reynolds pulled me aside again, her eyes sharp, her tone careful. "I just want to make sure you're okay," she said quietly, leaning toward me. "Are you really getting the support you need? You look exhausted." I froze, exhausted, didn't even begin to cover it. Every muscle ached, every nerve on edge. I forced a nod, gave a small smile, and mumbled, "Yes, thank you." But the doubt in her eyes told me she didn't believe me, and the thought terrified me. If she suspected, if someone else suspected, the whole fragile structure we had built would collapse. The cafeteria was worse. Whispers turned into comments, turned into concerned questions. One girl leaned over a table near mine. "Hey, are you sure you're okay? My cousin had this happen and she wasn't eating enough." I wanted to scream, to tell her she had no idea, that none of this was happening to me, that Emma, the one who needed care, was trapped at home. But I couldn't. I forced a smile, shook my head, and moved my tray to a quieter corner. Home was no relief. My parents had ramped up their control in response to the growing scrutiny. Emma was monitored constantly. I was monitored constantly. My every word, every movement, every interaction was calculated, rehearsed, performed. One misstep, one slip of expression, one faint whimper of exhaustion, and we would pay the price. and the more I acted, the more the lines between myself and the lie blurred. The psychological toll was unbearable. I stopped sleeping. Every night, I lay awake listening to Emma Pace whisper, cry quietly. She was trapped inside a nightmare of our parents' making, and I was her only shield. I tried to be strong for her, tried to be the protective sister, but inside I was breaking. I felt like a puppet whose strings had been yanked too tight, whose body and mind no longer belonged to me. Then came the confrontation I had been dreading. One of the girls at school, someone whose suspicion had been growing, cornered me in the hallway. Her expression sharp, her voice low but demanding. Wait, she said. I don't understand. Jeremy, isn't he? How does that even work? Are you sure? Panic surged in me like wildfire. My throat went dry, my hands shook. I had no choice but to fabricate another lie, something fast, believable. It's complicated, I whispered, forcing a tight smile. People just get confused sometimes. Everything's fine. She narrowed her eyes but didn't press further, and I walked away, every step shaking. That moment marked the first real crack in the wall we had built. The second someone outside the house saw a flaw, it would cascade like a landslide. At night, I confronted my parents, furious and terrified. You can't keep this going forever, I shouted. Everyone is noticing. Emma is scared out of her mind. I'm scared out of my mind. Something is going to break. My mother's eyes narrowed, sharp and cold. No, you will continue the act. You are 17. You are the one the world sees. You are the one who carries the burden. You do not falter. My father's voice was low, deadly. The only thing dying here is your selfishness. Do you understand? I nodded, my body trembling. I wanted to scream, to tear off the fake belly, to expose the truth and finally breathe, but I couldn't. Not without destroying Emma, not without destroying what little semblance of control we still had. Over the next weeks, the pressure intensified. Teachers asked more questions. Classmates whispered more openly. Neighbors made more pointed comments. I was exhausted, terrified, and slowly unraveling. Every day, I felt my identity slipping away, replaced by this false version of myself. This role I had no choice but to play. And in the midst of it all, Emma's fear and guilt grew heavier. She stayed hidden, spoke rarely, and cried quietly at night. I felt responsible for her, for the lie, for every moment of this nightmare. And every day, I realized more clearly how dark, how twisted, how manipulative our parents' obsession with reputation really was. The lie had stopped being a simple cover. It had become a living, breathing nightmare, one that threatened to destroy everything we loved, everyone we cared about, and the people we barely knew. And I knew deep down that it wasn't going to end until someone broke. By the 6th month, the lie had begun to consume not just our days, but our nights, our thoughts, our very identities. I was no longer just pretending to be pregnant. I had become the embodiment of the deception, the center of a storm that everyone outside our home believed was real. Every glance, every whisper, every smile from a neighbor or teacher or classmate was like a spotlight, shining directly on me, demanding that I perform flawlessly, that I maintain control when inside I was unraveling. Emma, meanwhile, had grown smaller, quieter, more fragile. She barely ate, barely spoke, and spent hours locked in her room, drawing pages filled with faces I didn't recognize, lines that seemed to reflect her fear, and guilt more than any story she could tell aloud. Some nights I would sit outside her door, listening to her pacing, hearing her soft sobs, and I would feel my own chest tighten until it hurt. I began to bring her small things, snacks she liked, little notes, things to distract her, when the walls felt like they were closing in. But even those gestures felt like lifelines stretched thin over a canyon of fear. I also began secretly trying to help her navigate the pregnancy. I researched online, reading about what a 14-year-old needed medically, about prenatal care, nutrition warning signs. Every page I read made my stomach twist with guilt because my parents refused to take her to a doctor, insisting that appearances and reputation were more important than health. I memorized what I could, whispered instructions to her when no one else was listening, quietly guiding her so that at least she had some small semblance of care. Every tip, every warning I gave her felt like both salvation and betrayal at the same time. I was helping her survive while reinforcing the lie we were living. The stress at school had reached a critical point. Rumors about Jeremy were spreading like wildfire, whispers that the father was someone older, comments that threatened to expose the truth. Teachers asked questions, students watched too closely, and I felt the weight of everyone's gaze pressing down on me. Each step I took felt calculated, rehearsed, like walking a tightrope over an abyss. One misstep and everything, Emma, the baby, our parents' carefully curated image, would come crashing down. One afternoon during lunch, a group of students surrounded me. They asked pointed questions about the father, the timeline, and the circumstances. My heart raced, my throat dried, and I felt my legs shaking. I forced a smile, lied quickly, and moved my tray to a quieter corner. But the damage had already begun. Whispers had spread to half the cafeteria, and everyone was staring. The pressure, the fear, the constant performance, it was becoming unbearable. At home, things were no better. My parents' control intensified, and I felt trapped in a cycle I couldn't escape. One night, after another whispered argument between them about how to manage the church and neighbors, I found Emma sitting on the stairs, clutching her sketchbook and crying. I can't do this anymore, she whispered. I can't pretend. I can't keep it inside. I'm scared all the time. I sat beside her, trying to hold her as she trembled. I know, I said softly, my voice cracking. I know it's impossible. But I'm here. I'll protect you as best I can. Just hold on a little longer. That night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much the lie had grown, how far it had spread, and how dangerously out of control it had become. It wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a living, breathing entity, one that threatened to destroy everything if it was exposed. And I realized with a sinking heart that we were no longer just living the lie. We were trapped by it, prisoners in a story we hadn't written and couldn't escape. The 7th month brought a pressure I couldn't have imagined, one that made every breath feel like a trap. By now, everyone in our lives, school, church, neighbors, distant relatives, believed the pregnancy was mine. The fake belly I wore had become a permanent, suffocating weight, pressing on me both physically and emotionally. Every step I took, every glance, every whispered question was a reminder that the lie wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a living entity that demanded attention, perfection, and obedience. At school, the scrutiny intensified. People began noticing changes that didn't exist, looking for signs, offering advice, giving unsolicited warnings. I had to memorize everything about prenatal care. Which foods were good, what to avoid, how to explain fatigue and mood swings. I had to anticipate questions about appointments I'd never actually attended, doctors I had never seen, ultrasounds I had never had. Every lie had to be precise, rehearsed, believable. One slip, one hesitation, and the truth would explode. Emma, meanwhile, had become almost invisible. She no longer left her room except for school or bathroom breaks. Her sketchbooks were filled with frantic, jagged lines, faces with wide, terrified eyes, hands covering mouths. Some nights I would sit outside her door, listening to her pacing, whispering, crying silently so my parents wouldn't hear. I began leaving small notes for her, reminders, encouragement, instructions on how to care for herself safely, and she would read them quietly, eyes wide, then tuck them back under her pillow like fragile treasure. Home had become a battlefield. My parents monitored every step, every word, every interaction. My father asked pointed questions late at night. How I was feeling, what I had eaten, how the baby was moving. My mother orchestrated the schedule, rehearsing my responses, coaching me on gestures, facial expressions, even small behaviors like yawning or stretching. It was exhausting, terrifying, and relentless. One evening, the tension reached a breaking point. My father cornered me in the kitchen, voice low and dangerous. Do you understand what I told you? He demanded. You are the act now. Every word, every motion, every interaction is part of the plan. Do not falter. Yes, I whispered, trembling. I understand. No, he snapped. Do you really understand? One slip and everything collapses. Emma's life, your future, our reputation, all of it. Do you understand? I nodded again, silent, heart hammering. Inside, I was shaking with rage, fear, and despair. I wanted to scream, to rip off the fake belly, to expose everything. But I couldn't, not yet. Not without putting Emma in unimaginable danger. The days passed in a blur of rehearsed gestures, whispered warnings, and quiet desperation. Every interaction at school, every visit from neighbors, every comment from relatives was a threat. I had to memorize who believed what, who knew which details, who was suspicious. The constant mental strain made my hands shake, my back ache, my chest tighten. I couldn't eat properly. I couldn't sleep properly. And the lie continued to grow, feeding on our fear, our guilt, our exhaustion. Then came the first major confrontation outside the house. During a church meeting, a well-meaning member leaned close to me, her voice soft but urgent. Are you sure you're getting the care you need? She asked. It's dangerous at your age. You shouldn't be alone in this. Panic surged in my chest. If I told her the truth, Emma could be exposed. If I lied, she would become suspicious. I nodded quickly, forcing a weak smile, and muttered something about a doctor's appointment next week. She didn't press further, but the seed of doubt had been planted. At home that night, I sat on my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Emma pacing and whispering in her room. I realized how deeply this lie had entangled us. It wasn't just a secret anymore, it was a web, a trap, a living thing that demanded perfection, obedience, and silence. And I knew deep down that the coming months would push us to the brink. The due date loomed closer, the stakes higher than ever. Every day brought new threats. New rumors, new pressures from school, church, neighbors, and relatives. I felt my sanity fraying, my body and mind exhausted beyond words. And yet I continued to perform, to protect Emma, to maintain the lie, because the alternative, the truth, was far too dangerous. I didn't know how much longer I could hold it together. But one thing was certain, the storm was coming, and there would be no escaping its force. The 8th month was pure chaos. The lie I had been forced to live in, to breathe, to carry on my back, was now everywhere. Every glance, every comment, every whispered conversation a reminder that we were trapped. Emma had grown smaller, quieter, almost spectral in her movements. The once vivid girl, who drew in sketchbooks, now seemed hollowed out by fear and shame. I stayed up at night, watching her pace, whisper, and cry quietly, afraid of every sound my parents might hear. I began leaving small notes for her, instructions, reassurances, anything that might keep her safe, but it felt like bailing out a sinking ship with a teaspoon. School had become a minefield. Every comment from classmates, every question from teachers, every concerned smile was another risk. Rumors about Jeremy had escalated. Kids were connecting dots, whispering in corners, sometimes laughing cruelly, sometimes with a tone that made my stomach twist with fear. And I was the one at the center of it, forced to perform, forced to smile, forced to respond with rehearsed words and gestures. One wrong look, one hesitation, and the truth would explode. At home, my parents' control was suffocating. My father demanded exact answers about how I was feeling, how the baby was moving, how I was sleeping. My mother orchestrated everything with terrifying precision. The schedule, the meals, the lies we had to tell anyone who asked. I felt trapped, exhausted, constantly aware that one slip could ruin Emma's life and my own. One night, the breaking point arrived. My parents were whispering in the kitchen about a neighbor who had started asking questions, and I could hear the sharp edge in their voices. Scandal, ruin, control. Emma had been pacing her room, her sobs barely audible through the walls. I finally couldn't take it anymore. Stop! I screamed, bursting into the living room. My voice echoed through the house. This isn't about reputation anymore. This is about Emma. She's 14. She's terrified. And the baby, your solution, is killing her. Or at least it's killing what's left of her childhood. My mom's face went pale and my father's jaw tightened. Enough, he said, voice low but deadly. Do you think you know better than we do? The only thing dying here is your selfishness. Do you understand? I wanted to scream, to tear off the fake belly, to expose everything. But I couldn't. Not without destroying Emma. Not without shattering the fragile control my parents had over this nightmare. I could only stare at her, my little sister, trembling and wide-eyed on the stairs, and feel the crushing weight of everything that had happened. The following days were unbearable. Every conversation at school, every glance from a neighbor, every subtle comment from a teacher became another threat. Emma barely left her room. I barely ate. My fake belly felt like a lead weight pressing down on my chest, my back, my shoulders. Every step was a reminder of the lie. Every smile a performance. Every whispered rumor a knife. And then the first real consequence outside the house appeared. A church member, well-meaning but persistent, cornered me after service. "Are you sure you're getting care?" she asked, concern etched in her face. "It's dangerous at your age. You shouldn't be alone in this." Panic surged. If I told her the truth, Emma could be exposed. If I lied, she would grow suspicious. I nodded quickly, forcing a weak smile, muttered something about a doctor's appointment next week, and fled. But the fear of exposure had begun to gnaw at me relentlessly. At home, the tension exploded into a series of late-night arguments. My parents orchestrated everything, trying to control the timing, the appearances, the conversations. Emma paced, whispered, cried quietly, while I watched helplessly, trapped by the lie and terrified of the moment it would collapse. By now, the due date was less than a month away. Every day, the pressure mounted. Every interaction outside the house carried the risk of exposure. Every conversation inside the house carried the risk of emotional collapse. I was 17, exhausted, terrified, and breaking under the constant weight of secrecy. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was one undeniable truth. I would protect Emma, no matter what. Because the lie wasn't just about the fake belly or the rumors. It was about survival, manipulation, and the fragile hope that one day, we might make it out alive. The final weeks of my fake pregnancy were a whirlwind of fear, exhaustion, and constant vigilance. Every day felt like walking on a wire stretched over a canyon, one misstep away from disaster. School, home, church, neighbors, everywhere I went, every interaction I had felt like a test I couldn't fail. And the closer we got to the due date, the heavier the weight on my chest became, both literally and metaphorically. Emma had retreated entirely into herself. She barely spoke, barely ate, barely left her room except for school. Her sketchbooks were filled with frantic, jagged lines, faces with wide, terrified eyes, hands covering mouths, silent testimonies to the trauma she endured. I stayed up late every night, listening to her pacing, whispering, crying softly. I left little notes for her, reminders, instructions, encouragement, but it never felt like enough. I felt guilty for surviving the lie while she carried the hidden reality. At school, rumors about Jeremy and the father's identity had become more pointed. Students whispered, teachers asked questions with feigned concern, and every glance felt like scrutiny. I had to fabricate details about doctor visits, ultrasound appointments, and prenatal care, all false, all rehearsed. One slip, one hesitation, one flicker of doubt in my expression, and the fragile illusion we had built would collapse entirely. One day, the whispering became confrontation. A student cornered me in the hallway, voice low but accusing. "Are you sure he's—" the timeline, it doesn't add up, does it? Panic surged. My throat tightened, my hands shook. I forced a smile and muttered, "It's complicated. People get confused sometimes. Everything's fine." But I could see the doubt in her eyes. The crack had begun, and the web of lies I had carried for months was starting to unravel outside, the home as well as inside. At home, the tension was unbearable. My parents were sharper, more controlling than ever. My father demanded exact answers about how I was feeling, how the baby was moving, how I slept. My mother orchestrated every interaction, coaching me on gestures, expressions, and words. Emma paced, whispered, and cried quietly, haunted by fear and shame. The house was suffocating, a prison constructed by reputation and manipulation, with walls built from our silence. Then came the night I finally broke. Emma had been pacing her room for hours, whispering, crying. I followed her quietly, and she turned to me, eyes wide, face streaked with tears. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't pretend. I can't. I'm too young. I didn't ask for this. I didn't know it would get so bad. I wanted to scream, to rip the fake belly off, to tell the world everything. But I couldn't. Not without destroying her. Not without shattering the delicate control my parents had over this nightmare. I pulled her close, holding her trembling body, and whispered, I know it's impossible. But I'll protect you. I'll do everything I can. Just a little longer." That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to her pacing, whispering and crying. I realized the lie had grown beyond what anyone could control. It wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a living, breathing force that demanded perfection, obedience, and silence. And the storm was about to hit. The due date loomed, the rumors outside the house intensified, and my body and mind were exhausted beyond words. Every interaction felt like a trap, every conversation a potential disaster. The fake pregnancy, the lies, the manipulation, the fear, they had all reached a breaking point. And I knew that the coming weeks would decide everything. The truth, the consequences, and the lives of everyone involved. The final week of the pregnancy, or at least, the final week of pretending, was a living nightmare. Every day felt like walking through a storm while carrying a mountain on my back. I could barely eat. I could barely sleep. Every glance from a neighbor, every whispered question from a teacher, every comment from a classmate made my heart race, like a wild animal trapped in my chest. The fake belly had become a permanent weight, pressing down on me physically, mentally, emotionally, until I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of our secret. Emma had become almost invisible. She stayed in her room, sketching faces with wide, terrified eyes, whispering to herself, crying quietly so my parents wouldn't hear. Some nights I would sit outside her door, listening to her pacing and murmuring, leaving little notes under her door. Instructions, reminders, encouragement. Every note I left felt like a drop in the ocean. Small, powerless, but I had no other way to protect her. She would read the notes silently, her hands shaking, and tuck them back under her pillow. I knew she was surviving in small fragments, and I held on to that fragile hope. At school, the pressure was unbearable. Rumors about Jeremy, the father of the real pregnancy, had spread further. Students whispered, teachers asked pointed questions, and the rumors became accusations in hushed tones. Every hallway became a minefield, every glance a threat. I had to remember every detail I had fabricated. The fake doctor visits, the imaginary ultrasound, the non-existent prenatal appointments. One slip, one hesitation, one misstep, and the fragile structure we had built would collapse entirely. Then came the first true crack in our carefully constructed world. During lunch, a group of students cornered me. One of them, whose suspicions had been growing, leaned close and asked in a low, sharp voice, "Are you sure about Jeremy? Because some things don't add up." Panic shot through me. My throat went dry. My hands shook. I forced a weak smile, murmured, "It's complicated. People get confused sometimes." Everything's fine, and slipped away. But the doubt had been planted. Someone out there was seeing through the lie. At home, the tension escalated. My parents were like predators, sharp and calculating, monitoring every interaction, every expression, every word. My father demanded detailed reports, how I was feeling, how the baby was moving, how I slept. My mother orchestrated every detail. The timing, the gestures, the rehearsed smiles, the precise way I carried the belly. Emma paced, whispered, and cried quietly, haunted by fear and shame. The house was a prison, a battlefield, a theater of fear. Then it happened. The night I had been dreading for months finally arrived. My labor began, or rather my mother staged it, forcing the timing to align with the story we had been living. She called a doctor I had never met, coordinated a nurse who thought I was the patient, and arranged for family and neighbors to be present under the illusion of reality. I was terrified. I could barely breathe under the belly, under the weight of the performance, under the fear of the truth being discovered. Emma was hidden in the corner of the room, trembling, silent, eyes wide. I wanted to scream at my parents, rip off the belly, and tell the world everything. But I couldn't. Not without destroying her. Not without shattering the delicate control my parents had maintained for months. I was trapped, powerless, a puppet on strings too tightly pulled. Hours passed in chaos. My parents directed every move, every word, every breath. The doctors performed their part. The neighbors whispered congratulations, and I had to act exhausted, in pain. Emotional, everything Emma truly felt but could not show. My mind was screaming, my body was shaking, and I felt the full weight of the lie crushing me. And then finally, it was over. The fake baby was presented. Everyone congratulated me, smiled at me, praised me for my strength and bravery. Emma's eyes were filled with tears, relief, fear, and a complicated mix of emotions I could not name. I wanted to collapse, to confess, to tell everyone the truth, but I stayed silent, because the risk was still too great. Later, alone in my room, I sat on the floor, staring at the ceiling, my body shaking. Emma came in quietly, and for the first time in months, she spoke openly. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For staying strong. For protecting me." I held her, feeling the weight of months of lies, fear, guilt, and love pressing down on me. I realized in that moment that the lie had protected her, but it had also scarred us both. We were forever changed, bound by secrets, manipulation, and survival. Years later, I would receive a graduation card from Emma, signed with both her name and the name of her child. In that moment, every memory, every tear, every whispered conversation, every moment of fear and chaos came rushing back. I realized the truth. The lie had been cruel, but it had also been a shield. And through it all, somehow we had survived. Years later, sitting in my small apartment with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, I still replayed everything that had happened as if it were a movie I could never turn off. The memories weren't just vivid, they were suffocating, chaotic, impossible to untangle from the person I had become. I remembered the late-night arguments, the whispered secrets, the panic of navigating a lie that wasn't mine but had consumed me completely. I remembered the way Emma had retreated into herself, her fragile hands clutching sketchbooks filled with silent cries, her eyes wide with fear, the trembling voice that had whispered, "I can't do this anymore." I remembered the suffocating weight of the fake belly, the way my parents had weaponized shame and reputation against us both, and the terrifying realization that the truth, if spoken too soon, could destroy everything. And then yesterday, I received something in the mail that ripped open that old wound. A graduation card. I recognized Emma's handwriting immediately, neat, precise, but with a small flourish at the end that only she could manage. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, scrawled across the front in bold letters, were her words, a simple, heartfelt message of gratitude for the years I had protected her, for the lies I had carried to keep her safe, for the love I had tried to give even while trapped in a nightmare. And at the bottom, signed not just with her name, but with another, her child's. 2 names, 2 lives I had held close and protected through deception, fear, and chaos. I sat back, tears blurring my vision, and felt the full weight of what we had endured. The fake pregnancy, the constant performance, the manipulation, the panic, the guilt. It had all led to this moment. Somehow, through the mess, the chaos, and the emotional wreckage, we had survived. And somehow, Emma had flourished. It was a bittersweet realization. I couldn't erase the trauma or the manipulation. I couldn't undo the months of fear, secrecy, and relentless pressure. But I could acknowledge that I had done what I could, that I had protected my sister, that I had held the line while the world tried to push us under. I had survived a nightmare constructed by my parents, obsession with appearances and reputation, and though the scars remained, the love between Emma, her child, and me endured. Holding the card in my hands, I realized something profound. Survival wasn't just about enduring the lie. It was about carrying the weight of what mattered most, protecting the people you loved, and somehow, through chaos and trauma, finding a way to reclaim your life. I looked at the 2 names at the bottom of the card and felt a strange, overwhelming mix of relief, sorrow, and pride. The story of those years would never leave me. But finally, I could let go of the fear. The lie was over. The nightmare had ended. And in the ruins of those months, we had built something real. Family, love, and resilience. The days after the birth were surreal. The neighbors and church members still offered congratulations, their eyes wide with admiration or curiosity, and I smiled politely, pretending exhaustion, masking the truth that I hadn't just carried a child, I had carried a secret that could have ruined everyone. At home, my parents were quieter, but I could feel their watchful eyes following every move. Still measuring, still controlling, as if they wanted to make sure the lie had been perfect to the last detail. Emma was different now. She moved more freely, spoke a little more, laughed softly when no one else was looking. Her relief was palpable, but she still carried the invisible chains of those months, the fear, the shame, the helplessness. I tried to let her breathe, to let her reclaim some of the childhood she had been robbed of, but it was difficult. Our parents had managed to warp her perception of what she should feel, and part of me knew the psychological scars would take years to fade. I found myself sitting on my bed one evening, watching her play quietly with the baby, my heart breaking and swelling with love at the same time. It was a bittersweet kind of relief. I had survived, Emma had survived. The child was alive and healthy, and yet the years of lies and manipulation had left their mark. I wanted to scream at my parents for what they had done, but I didn't. Not yet. Not without risking Emma's fragile sense of safety. Months turned into years. Emma grew more confident, and I began reclaiming pieces of myself. I went to college, started working, and slowly began unraveling the emotional knots the lie had left in my mind. Every so often, I would think of my parents' words. The only thing dying here is your selfishness. Those words were like a blade I carried everywhere, cutting through my confidence and self-worth, a reminder of how deeply they had weaponized shame. I started therapy, tentatively at first, hesitant to admit the full story. But over time, the sessions became a lifeline, a place where I could unravel the fear, guilt, and trauma that had been lodged inside me for so many years. I learned to separate my own identity from the performance I had been forced to live. I learned to forgive myself for surviving, even when surviving meant carrying a lie that hurt others, even if it was meant to protect them. Emma and I grew closer than ever, but it wasn't the same as before. There were scars, quiet moments where we both flinched, moments when the past rose unbidden. Yet we were bound by something unbreakable, the shared experience of surviving a nightmare together. We could look at each other and understand a depth of fear and love that no one else could comprehend. The child, the one Emma, carried through terror and secrecy, became a bridge between us. Watching her mother thrive, watching Emma gain confidence and laughter again, and knowing that I had played a part in keeping her safe, brought an overwhelming, complicated pride. The mess, the chaos, the trauma, all of it was still there. But so was resilience, love, and survival. Now holding that graduation card in my hands, I felt the full circle of the years we had survived. The card wasn't just a thank you. It was proof that even in the darkest, most manipulated, most suffocating moments, love and protection could survive. I traced the two names at the bottom of the card, and allowed myself to cry, not for fear. Not for guilt, but for relief. Relief that we had made it. Relief that Emma had made it. Relief that despite everything, life continued. The story of that nightmare, the lies, the manipulation, the terror would never leave me. But the story of survival, of protecting someone you love even in impossible circumstances, of enduring chaos and still finding moments of light. That story was mine too. And finally, for the first time in years, I felt like I could put down the weight I had carried for so long and breathe. It wasn't until years later, when Emma and I had both gained enough distance from the nightmare, that I finally confronted my parents. I had rehearsed this confrontation in my mind 1,000 times, wondering if I could even speak without breaking. And when it finally happened, it wasn't cinematic or loud, it was quiet, devastating and sharp, the way real emotional pain always is. I need to say this, I began, voice trembling but firm. What you did to Emma and me, what you forced us to do, it wasn't protection. It was control. You didn't care about her health or her safety. You cared about your image. My father's face went rigid, his eyes narrowing. We did what had to be done. You don't understand responsibility, sacrifice? No, I cut in, more firmly than I expected. I understand responsibility. I protected Emma when you refused to. I survived the chaos you created. And that was not my choice. That was survival. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her hands trembling slightly. You owe us! No, I interrupted, my voice breaking. I don't owe you anything. You manipulated us. You scared us. You almost ruined her life and mine. I survived because I had no other choice. And that is the truth. The silence that followed was unbearable. It wasn't dramatic. No one stormed out. No one yelled. It was quiet, but it was final. I had said the words. I had reclaimed the truth. And even though the damage couldn't be undone, even though scars remained, I felt the first real release in years. Emma stood beside me silently. Her eyes were wide, proud, and maybe a little terrified too. But she was with me, and that was all that mattered. Looking back now at the card she sent me yesterday, at the life she has built with her child, I understand something profound. Survival doesn't mean perfection. Survival doesn't mean freedom from fear or guilt. Survival means carrying the weight of what matters most, protecting those you love, and somehow, through chaos and trauma, finding a way to reclaim your life. The fake pregnancy, the manipulation, the lies, they were hell. But they were also a strange kind of shield. They allowed Emma to survive, allowed the child to survive, allowed me to survive, and eventually, they became a story of resilience. I will always carry the scars of those months. The exhaustion, the panic, the constant fear, the suffocating weight of lies. But I will also carry the memory of standing strong when it mattered most, of protecting the people I loved, and of surviving a nightmare that should never have existed. I look at the two names at the bottom of that card, Emma and her child, and I let myself feel something I haven't felt in years, hope. Not the naive, fragile hope of teenagers trapped in a lie, but the kind of hope that comes from knowing you endured. You protected, and somehow, against all odds, life went on. The nightmare is over. The chaos is behind us. And though the scars remain, so does love, survival, and the messy, beautiful truth that we made it through.